That packet of biscuits in your pantry, bought without a second thought, is not dangerous. Nothing on this list is. This was never a "these will hurt you" story. It's a "what does the label tell you" story. The words vegetable oil and food colors on the panel are legal catch-all terms that don't specify what's behind them. Today I'm checking 7 Australian biscuits leaning on those generic terms, then showing 2 that name things specifically instead. The single best-selling biscuit in the country is on this list, and it's not one of the 2 that spell it out clearly. Quick standard before we start, because I want to be genuinely fair about what this actually is before we get into a single biscuit on this list. Every single biscuit covered here is completely legal and safe to eat, full stop, and I want to say that clearly before we go any further into anything else. Vegetable oil and food colors are both perfectly legal terms under Australian food labelling law, and using either one isn't a safety issue in any way. The real question running through this entire list is a transparency one. Instead, does the ingredient panel actually name the specific oil and the specific colors used, the way butter or a named natural color like beetroot extract would, or does it lean on a generic catch-all term that's technically accurate on paper, but tells an ordinary shopper almost nothing useful standing there in the aisle? There's a real meaningful difference between a company genuinely doing the right thing behind the scenes and that same company's own packet actually telling you about it on the shelf in front of you, standing there deciding what to buy. Number 7, a supermarket home brand chocolate biscuit. The cheapest option sitting on the shelf, bought purely for value with no particular brand loyalty attached to it at all, grabbed on autopilot at the end of a big weekly shop without a second glance at the back. Budget pricing doesn't mean the label tells you more, and if anything, it usually tells you noticeably less than the branded version sitting right next to it at double the price. Worth checking the current ingredient panel before assuming anything specific either way, since own label biscuits in this general category commonly use generic vegetable oil and coded food colors the exact same way branded lines do further up the shelf. The cheapest pack on the shelf and the most expensive pack sitting beside it can share exactly the same vague labeling, word for word, line for line. Cheapest pack on the shelf, same vague label as everyone else covered on this list. That's the baseline dealt with completely, first of 7, setting the tone for everything that follows on this whole list. The next one is a genuinely Australian-owned company doing much the same basic thing. Number 6, Unibic, a proudly Australian-owned biscuit company, a name that reads as a genuine local alternative to the near monopoly one company holds over most of this entire aisle, front to back. Australian ownership doesn't automatically mean a more specific ingredient panel sitting quietly on the back of the pack, no matter how much the ownership story matters. Worth checking the current ingredient panel before assuming local ownership alone settles the question for you standing there in the aisle. Being locally owned is a real, genuine point of pride, and it's a completely separate question from what the ingredient panel actually specifies once you turn the packet over and read it properly. Proudly Australian owned. Just as vague on the back as the big name sitting one shelf over from it. That's the local alternative sorted. 2 down and 5 to go on this list. The next 5 are all the exact same company, because one single company owns nearly this entire aisle from end to end. Number 5, Arnott's Scotch Finger. One of the simplest, most old-fashioned biscuits in the entire range. The plain one that reads as the safe, unfussy choice compared to anything chocolate-coated or cream-filled sitting nearby on the shelf. A simple-sounding biscuit can still carry the exact same generic oil labeling as a far more elaborate one sitting right next to it. Worth checking the current ingredient panel before assuming plain automatically means specific once you actually read the back. Plain as a flavor description doesn't guarantee specific as a labeling practice on the actual printed panel. The plainest biscuit in the entire range, not necessarily the plainest label once you actually stop and read it properly. That's the simple one dealt with completely, 3 down, and holding the same pattern steady. The next one is dressed up with jam and coconut, and the exact same question follows it there too, shape or no shape. Number 4, Arnott's Iced VoVo, a beloved, nostalgic, distinctly Australian biscuit shape, pink icing and coconut and raspberry jam laid out in 3 neat stripes, the kind of biscuit that shows up at nearly every school fete and church stall in the entire country. Nostalgia and a distinctive, instantly recognizable look don't tell you what's actually coloring that bright pink icing sitting right on top of it. Worth checking the current ingredient panel's specific color and oil listings before assuming anything, following the exact same food colors and vegetable oil pattern already confirmed on the brand's other lines further down this list. The shape and the nostalgia attached to it are completely genuine and real. The ingredient specificity is a separate question entirely, sitting quietly on the back where nobody thinks to look. The most recognizable shape in the entire aisle, the same generic label as everything else sitting in it regardless. That's the nostalgic one, handled completely. 4 down and 3 left to go on this whole list. The next one is the one people buy specifically because it feels like a step up from everything else. Number 3, Arnott's Mint Slice, positioned as a slightly more indulgent adult-feeling biscuit, chocolate-coated, often reached for as an actual dessert substitute after dinner rather than a lunchbox snack for the kids. Feeling more premium doesn't mean the label is any more specific. Once you actually flip the packet over and read it properly. Worth checking the current ingredient panel before assuming anything, following the exact pattern already confirmed on Tim Tam's own panel further down this list. The premium feeling is doing real work on you here, the exact same way it does with the confirmed Tim Tam panel sitting one shelf over from it. Feels like a treat you're finally allowed as an adult after a long day. Reads like every other biscuit in the entire cupboard regardless. That's the grown-up biscuit sorted completely, 5 down, and only 2 left standing on this whole list. The next one is the biscuit built entirely around being shared at a table, and the sharing doesn't extend to the label at all. Number 2, Arnott's Monte Carlo, a classic jam and cream filled biscuit, one of the most recognizable names in the entire Arnott's range. Decades of shelf presence in nearly every Australian pantry from one end of the country to the other. Decades of familiarity haven't changed the basic labeling pattern sitting quietly on the back of the packet. Generation after generation, worth checking the current ingredient panel before assuming decades of trust settles anything about how specific it actually is. A biscuit doesn't need to be new or exotic or imported to still carry the same generic terms as everything else already covered on this list. One of the oldest names sitting in the pantry, same young vague label as the newest one on the shelf regardless of age. That's another familiar name dealt with completely, 6 down and just 1 left standing on this entire list. The final one is the single best-selling biscuit in the entire country, by a very wide margin indeed. Number 1, Arnott's Tim Tam, the single best-selling, most iconic biscuit in Australia, a genuine cultural institution in its own right. The biscuit people overseas specifically ask visitors to bring back home in their suitcase after a trip. Being the biggest name in the entire category doesn't automatically mean the most specific label sitting on the back of the packet, no matter how much shelf space it commands. The confirmed current ingredient panel lists milk chocolate containing vegetable oil among several other things, plus wheat flour, sugar, vegetable oil, again listed separately, golden syrup, and food colors listed only as caramel 3, Beet Red, Cochineal, and Annatto, with nothing further specified beyond those 4 names on the entire packet. The country's favorite biscuit runs on exactly the same generic oil and color labeling as the home brand pack, sitting all the way back at the very start of this list. The most famous biscuit in the entire country. The same generic label as the cheapest one on this whole list, word for word. If the biggest name in Australian biscuits reads this vague once you actually check it for yourself, here's what the 2 that actually spell it out clearly look like instead, sitting on a shelf you might not have looked at twice before. Okay, 7 biscuits down, and I want to repeat something clearly before we move on to the good news. None of this is dangerous, and none of it is illegal in any way. It's a real gap between what a company might genuinely be doing well behind the scenes and what its own packet actually tells you about that on the shelf in front of you. Here are 2 biscuits worth checking first, next time you're deciding what to put in the trolley. Safe number 1, a traditional Anzac biscuit. The Anzac biscuit recipe is traditionally simple by category: rolled oats, coconut, golden syrup, flour, sugar, and butter or margarine, with no eggs at all in the original recipe developed specifically to survive long shipping trips to soldiers stationed overseas during the war. That history typically results in a genuinely shorter, more specifically named ingredient list than a chocolate-coated or cream-filled biscuit sitting nearby on the exact same shelf. Worth confirming the current specific products panel before assuming this holds for every version sold. A 100-year-old recipe built to survive an actual war ends up more specifically labeled than most of this week's supermarket shelf, and that's genuinely worth sitting with for a second. Safe 2, Byron Bay cookies sold in the biscuit aisle, right alongside the very brands this whole list has been checking. A premium positioned Australian cookie brand commonly built around noticeably shorter ingredient lists and named fats like butter rather than a generic vegetable oil, buried somewhere in the middle of the list. Worth confirming the current specific products panel before stating any of this as settled fact. This is really the whole premise of this entire list captured in one single packet. A bigger, more dominant brand isn't automatically the more specific one sitting on the shelf next to it. A smaller name on the shelf and an ingredient list you can actually picture in your head without needing a dictionary to get all the way through it. This was never really about 7 bad biscuits sitting quietly in a pantry somewhere, and none of the companies covered here did anything remotely illegal by labeling things the way they did. It's about the gap between a generic catch-all term that's completely legal on paper and a specific one that actually tells you something useful before you buy it and toss it in the trolley. The same generic vegetable oil, coded color numbers labeling gap shows up in crackers, cakes, and other packaged baked goods sitting in that exact same aisle, one shelf over from the biscuit tins. Once you learn to check whether a label names things specifically or leans on a generic term instead, the same gap becomes visible throughout the rest of the biscuit and snack aisle, tin after tin, packet after packet, for as long as you keep shopping there.